Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Holly Bohart, Senior Editor of Books and Related Resources here at NAEYC. I want to welcome you to this discussion of the third edition of the book Ethics and the Early Childhood Educator using the NAEYC Code. Authors Stephanie Feeney and Nancy Freeman are with us today to present a brief overview of ethics in early childhood education. And let me introduce our presenters. Stephanie Feeney is Professor Emerita of Education at the University of Hawaii at Manoa, where she taught courses in early childhood education and directed the master's program in early childhood education. Nancy Freeman is Professor Emerita of Education at the University of South Carolina in Columbia, where she taught in early childhood education and did extensive work to support the professional development of the child care workforce, especially those who work with infants and toddlers. Both presenters are also co-authors of Teaching the NAEYC Code of Ethical Conduct, a resource guide, and of the Focus on Ethics column that's a regular feature of NAEYC's journal, Young Children. They will be presenting at NAEYC's Professional Learning Institute in Austin in June, and would love to see you at their session on increasing your ethical competence. Before we get started with the presentation, I'm going to give just a few housekeeping details for our listeners. We'll have some time for questions after the presentation, so if you have questions you want to ask, please write them in the box on the lower left side of your screen. The authors will answer as many questions as they have time for. During the webinar, we'll have 3 simple polls that will pop up on your screen, so watch for those. If you're using a telephone line, be aware that you may experience a slight delay. You'll really have the best experience if you can use the sound on your computer. Just a reminder, we do not offer continuing education credits or certificates of completion for our webinars. The webinar will be recorded and we will notify you by email when it's available to view. Thank you again for joining us this afternoon, and let's get started. Nancy and Stephanie, I'm going to turn it over to you now.
Thank you, Holly. Welcome to this webinar on ethics. We're glad you're with us. You've learned a bit about us. Now we'd like to know a little bit about you. Click on the Survey tab above to answer these 3 questions. What is your role in the field of early childhood education? Are you a student preparing to enter the field, a classroom teacher, a program director, a teacher educator? Do you work for an agency, or do you do something else? The second question is, how long have you been an early childhood educator? And the third question is, what do you know about the NAEYC Code of Ethical Conduct? We have been involved in NAEYC's work on ethics for many years. Stephanie was one of the authors of the first version of the code in 1989. We have both participated in revisions of the code, writing articles, a column, and 2 NAEYC books about ethics. The most important thing about all of NAEYC's work on ethics is that it has been guided by participation from the field. The experiences and wisdom came from early childhood educators like you, who share their experiences and their thinking about the right thing to do in many of the challenging situations that early childhood educators face. In this webinar, we present a brief overview of ethics in early childhood education. We will discuss the relationship between ethics and professionalism, concepts and terminology, the NAEYC Code of Ethical Conduct, the process for determining the nature of a problem and analyzing an ethical dilemma, some recurring dilemmas, available resources for ethics. We'll also ask about the ethical issues you are facing.
Before we begin to look at the NAEYC Code of Ethics, it's important to realize that a commitment to moral behavior is an essential component of every profession. This commitment is stated in the profession's Code of Ethics. So NAEYC's work on ethics is an important part of our efforts to achieve greater professional recognition, and it's part of the current Power to the Profession initiative. A profession is an occupation that makes a significant contribution to society. One criteria for determining if an occupation is a profession is altruism, also called unselfish dedication. Early childhood education meets this criteria very well. There are other criteria, such as lengthy training and high standards for admission, that early childhood education does not meet at this time. So early childhood education is not yet recognized by everyone as a true profession. But early childhood educators make an important contribution to our society as they work with children at the critical stage in the life cycle. Because our actions can have such a strong impact on children and families, we must be dedicated to the best interests of young children and to service to the society. Over the years, I've come to believe that it is this moral commitment to children that should be at the heart of our work in early childhood education.
We always begin our ethics presentations with a review of terminology to make sure that we're all using terms in the same way. The following is a brief review of some of the important terminology. You will find these definitions on page 8 of the Code of Ethics, which is a handout for this webinar. Morality. Morality involves views of what is good, right, or proper, beliefs about one's obligations, and ideas about how people should behave. Morality is characterized by words such as right, ought, just, and fair. Morality is based on values. Values are things an individual believes to be intrinsically worthwhile or desirable, that are prized for themselves, such as truth, beauty, honesty, justice, respect for people, and for the environment. Ethics is the study of right and wrong, duties and obligations. Ethics involves critical reflection on morality, the ability to make choices between values, and the examination of the moral dimensions of relationships.
Your personal values and morality provide a good foundation for your professional morality. They're an important part of who you are as an early childhood educator, but they do not provide all of the moral guidance that you need in the workplace. That requires professional ethics. Professional ethics are the moral commitments of a profession that involve reflection that extends the personal morality practitioners bring to their work, concern actions of right and wrong in the workplace, and help individuals resolve the moral issues they encounter in their work. A code of ethics is a document based on a profession's core values that spells out ethical responsibilities and offers guidance for resolving dilemmas that involve conflicting responsibilities in the workplace. It is particularly important that early childhood educators have a code of ethics for two reasons. First, and most important, because adults have tremendous power over vulnerable young children. What teachers do can be very beneficial to children, but they can also do great harm. A code of ethics helps us avoid doing harm. A second reason that a code is important is that early childhood educators have responsibilities to different groups of people: children, families, colleagues, employers, community, and the larger society. A code helps us to prioritize our responsibilities to each of those groups.
In recognition of the need for ethical guidance in early childhood, NAEYC developed a code of ethics that has been used in early childhood education since 1989. Knowing and using this code is an essential part of being a competent early childhood educator and demonstrating professionalism in your work. Now, let's look at the NAEYC Code. You can find the link under the tab for handouts for this webinar. The code includes a preamble, core values, and sections addressing our responsibilities to children, families, colleagues, and community. The core values are basic commitments that lie at the heart of the field of early childhood education and provide the foundation for all of the items in the code. They are found on the first page of the code. They reflect the beliefs that are essential and non-negotiable, are embraced by all members of the profession, are rooted in the field's history and grow from its fundamental beliefs, and move the discussion of professional ethics from personal morality to professional values. The four sections of the code spell out our responsibilities to children, families, colleagues, and society. They are mandates that describe what early childhood educators must and must not do. They describe how we are required to act and are clearly spelled out in our code. The most important responsibility is the first one listed in the code, Principle 1.1. Above all, we shall not harm children. We shall not participate in practices that are emotionally damaging, physically harmful, disrespectful, degrading, dangerous, exploitative, or intimidating to children. This principle has precedence over all others in this code.
Some of the issues we encounter in the workplace are responsibilities, and we must do what the code directs us to do. Other issues are dilemmas. They require thoughtful deliberation. Ethical dilemmas are situations that present conflicting obligations and have more than one possible resolution. That can be justified as an ethical choice. You might hear someone say that they are on the horns of a dilemma. That means that they need to choose between two equally good or equally bad alternatives. This is an example of a dilemma. It is right to protect trees to preserve the beauty of our natural environment. It is right to cut down trees to build homes that provide jobs and places for people to live. It is a dilemma because either of these positions can be justified. Now let's go back to the Code of Ethics. When you encounter a problem in your workplace, the first thing you need to do is understand the nature of the problem. The Code of Ethics can help you to address ethical issues, but not every issue involves ethics. This graphics which you can find on page 21 of the new edition of Ethics in the Early Childhood Educator, will guide you in identifying ethical issues. The first step is to decide if the problem involves ethics, and if it does, if it is a responsibility or a dilemma. Nancy will give you some examples.
Let's look at some typical situations. In the first example, you find a plant with hot chili peppers growing in your playground. You would need to remove it immediately to protect the children from harm. This is not a dilemma. Protecting children is an ethical responsibility. In the next example, the parent of a boy in your group insists that he wear his jacket until the temperature reaches 70 degrees. The child plays hard, gets too warm, and wants to take off his coat. You can justify honoring the parent's request, and you can also justify letting him remove the jacket. Since you can argue that both of these alternatives is right, you are facing an ethical dilemma. In the final example, the teacher in the room next door to you decorates her classroom walls with lots of cute materials that you think are distracting, overstimulating, and have no educational value. This is a concern, but it is not a threat to children's safety and well-being. It is not an ethical issue.
When you determine that you are facing an ethical dilemma rather than an ethical responsibility, you will want to use a systematic process to reach a justifiable resolution. It takes some time to get acquainted with the process and learn to use it well. We don't have time to do that today, but we do want you to know that addressing an ethical dilemma requires careful analysis. We hope you will learn to use this process, which is found on page 27 of the book Ethics in the Early Childhood Educator.
Now, let's look at some ethical dilemmas that are encountered frequently in early childhood programs. Remember that there are two justifiable resolutions to a dilemma. The first is a dilemma involving children that we encounter frequently. A child in your class consistently hits or pushes other children, and they are becoming afraid of him. His parents think his behavior is nothing out of the ordinary and refuse to work with the teacher to address it. In this situation, the teacher realizes that she must balance her responsibility to this child with her responsibilities to the other children, their families, and the teachers who are stressed by trying to meet the needs of this child. The second is a frequently encountered type of dilemma involving families. You have probably run into one that is similar. A 4-year-old mother asks you not to let him nap, because she needs to get ready to go. She needs to get up early to go to work. And he stays up until 10 p.m. when he's had a nap. You observe that he needs a nap to have a good afternoon. In this situation, the teacher realizes that she must balance her responsibility to the mother with her responsibility to the needs of the child. Here is a common dilemma that involves colleagues. Several teachers are taking a break in the staff room. You hear one of them sharing details about an argument she overheard between a child's parents in the parking lot that morning. In this situation, the teacher needs to choose between ignoring the gossip to maintain her good relationship with her colleagues or confronting them with the violation of the family's right to privacy.
I've lost my sound.
Yeah, there we go. And here is a dilemma that has to do with early childhood educators' responsibilities to the community. You are a kindergarten teacher in a public school who believes in meaningful hands-on learning. You are required to administer a paper and pencil test at the end of the year that is very stressful for the children. In this situation, the teacher's choice is to administer the test, even if she thinks it's harmful to children, or to refuse to administer the test.
These are difficult dilemmas, and teachers need guidance in dealing with them. Like a compass, the Code of Ethics points you in the right direction and guides your decision-making when you encounter an ethical issue like these in your workplace. But you need to be aware that while a code helps you move in the right direction, it is not an instructional manual or a cookbook with all of the answers. You need to combine guidance from the code with your own best professional judgment.
The code is a living document. It needs to provide timely and useful guidance for those who use it. The code has been regularly revised to meet changing needs. It communicates the field's growing professionalism and is part of teachers' professional repertoire. It's included in training, books, and articles. And the impact of the code can be seen by its adoption by other professional organizations, including the Southern Early Childhood Association, SECA, the Association for Childhood Education International, ACEI, and the National Association for Family Child Care. The NAEYC website has a number of ethics resources. There you will find the NAEYC Code of Ethics, which was developed to address the issues faced by teachers working directly with young children and families. It is available in English and Spanish. After the code was developed, we realized that program administrators and adult educators, teacher educators and trainers, face some unique ethical issues and could benefit from ethical guidance. In response to their needs, supplements for program administrators and adult educators were created. These two supplements are found on the website. They are to be designed to be used with the code. They do not stand alone. NAEYC also produces a poster with the code statement of commitment, which acknowledges individuals' commitment to embrace the core values of the early childhood field. And the code is available in pamphlet form for easy access and to share with families and others. NAEYC also publishes 2 books on professional ethics: Ethics in the Early Childhood Educator, published in 2018, that it's available through NAEYC, and Teaching the NAEYC Code of Ethical Conduct, a resource guide that provides guidance and copy-ready activities for teaching others about the code and its application. Another resource is Focus on Ethics, a regular column in Young Children in which we present and analyze an ethical issue with input from educators like you. The columns are all posted on the NAEYC website.
That is the end of a very, very brief introduction. We will be able to go a little more deeply in the questions. As we said at the beginning of this presentation, NAEYC's work on ethics is based on input from the field. We would appreciate hearing from you. As a follow-up to this webinar, please share an ethical issue that you have encountered in your work. We both thank you for being here today, and we look forward to seeing some of you in Austin. We hope that this presentation has inspired you to get to know the code better and to use it with your work with children and families.
Okay, thank you, Nancy and Stephanie. We do have a few questions from our listeners. As a reminder, if you do have questions for the presenters, enter them in the box on your screen. So one of our listeners has asked, who does the code apply to?
Stephanie, you going to pick that one up?
Yep. I'm looking for it. Hold on. There we go. Okay, in response to the question, to whom does the code apply? When we developed the code, we didn't have very much time. We had a deadline, and we had a very small grant to guide us or finance us in developing the code. So we decided to focus on ethical guidance for those who work directly with children and families in early childhood programs. The code is intended to be used by teachers and caregivers who work with children in programs, early childhood and child care programs, as well as administrators of programs. Others who are part of the field can be guided by it to the extent that it addresses issues that they face, but it does not apply to parents, personnel and agencies that don't serve children, policymakers, or legislators.
Thank you, Stephanie. And others want to know, do I have to follow the code?
Well, the short answer to that question is no. The NAEYC Code is not enforced. One reason enforcement isn't possible is because NAEYC is a membership organization. There were no restrictions as to who can join. And that's one way professional organizations for professionals such as doctors and lawyers, and those are professions with enforceable ethical codes, are different. Members of those organizations must have extensive specialized education, and they must pass rigorous exams. And they can lose their license, their right to practice, by violating their codes of ethics. The drafters of the NAEYC Code recognized enforcement wasn't possible, so they decided to focus their efforts instead on widely distributing the code and making it part of NAEYC's accreditation systems. It's our hope that you will be committed to following the code, but there are no penalties for failing to do so.
Thank you, Nancy. Another listener writes that as a trainer, I find that early educators think that this is a wonderful tool, but in the end, we are fearful of committing to it, even the directors of the programs. Is this common, and how would you address that fear?
Nancy, let me talk to that. That's very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I've never heard anybody talk about being afraid to follow the code. I can't see what they would be afraid of, what you would be nervous about. The code comes from the guidance of people in our field. It tells us what those of us who work with children believe are the most morally appropriate ways of behaving, and it doesn't demand anything. So I would really love to hear from that the person who asked the question about what the fears are, because we would really like to understand that and be able to think about it and maybe respond to it.
Okay. How would you suggest introducing and adopting this into your school?
I'll handle that one. I think one reminder of why it's so important is that it is built into the NAEYC program accreditation, and I presume this question is based on programs for young children, serving children directly. So I think the director has to do a staff development and point out that this is part of who we are as early childhood educators. And with the current emphasis, power to the profession and other initiatives, that let's recognize the important work we do and act like professionals. So to gradually introduce the code, I think a session like this, we sometimes call it Ethics 101, it's the beginning, can make people aware of it, and also you can build their repertoire of understanding it. And this is exactly what the other book we mentioned, this third edition, but the other book, the handbook with resources, it has copy-ready materials for very beginning to introduce the code all the way to working with very sophisticated learners. So I would urge you to look at that to begin to think how you can build introduction and education on professional ethics into your program's professional development.
Let me just add to that a little bit. If you go back to my first comment about our moral commitments, and so I think that a director or a leader could start by just talking about how important it is when we work with young children that we behave with high moral standards, and that the code will help us do that.
Okay, I think we have a little more clarification from the person who asked or who mentioned people being afraid to institute the code. They are afraid of making it program policy for staff to follow.
Ah, good. Okay.
I'm curious if that means that violating the code would be reason for dismissal, for losing their job. Still a bit hard to understand.
It's a good question. I think, Holly, I hope you'll put that down. I think, and we'll try to remember it and come back to it. There are programs that make it policy. We would certainly, I think, support the idea that a person who harms children, perhaps should, not even perhaps, a person who is doing harm to children should be removed from an early childhood program. So that would seem a reasonable policy. But I think we should think about it as policy. It certainly can be informal policy. A lot of programs we know will give the code to new staff members and say, we follow these guidelines, which doesn't mean it's set in stone, but it is what we aspire to do. It's what we think would be the right thing to do as a program. So I think that maybe we need to look at informal policy versus legislated policy.
But I think particularly that principle 1.1, above all, we shall not harm children, seems like that should be a cause for dismissal. If you are doing something that is harmful, seriously disrespectful to children, you shouldn't be working with children, in my view.
Okay, thank you. Another person writes, all of the classroom situations that you mentioned here have actually happened. What can teachers do in these situations? How do we actually resolve these dilemmas?
Okay, let me respond to that. First, we have never made up an ethical dilemma. Every single dilemma in our books, in our workshops, there are a whole bunch of them listed in the Teaching the Code book. They came from teachers, administrators, directly from programs. We've somewhat changed the situation when we write it to simplify it. They're all real. And we were aware today that there's no way in 1 hour that we can begin to address these dilemmas. They're challenging. They take serious thought and engagement on the part of staff members. However, the book, Ethics in the Early Childhood Educator, the new book, takes each of these situations and goes through them in great detail, showing how the code can be used in each one of them, and also showing where at some point you need to use your own judgment. So we have given guidance in these books. The Focus on Ethics column in the journal Young Children has more cases that we've worked through and analyzed, and in our session upcoming in Austin, we'll be working through a very interesting case that involves a transgender child. So we would love to have a 3-hour webinar and we could work through a case, but these analysis of dilemmas are available for you.
And I think your observation that you've lived all these cases, as Stephanie said, we never make them up, but that's why we're turning to you in this webinar too to say, what are some new issues that you're facing that we haven't encountered before? So that's why we really are asking for input to help us provide more guidance to analyze those new cases.
And those new cases might show up in a column. We sometimes ask people who've presented a case to us and said, what did you do? Would you help us write about it? It might show up in a workshop. And so everything that we do is informed by the reality out there in the workplaces that you are all in.
Thank you. Another listener is curious about when was the last time the code was revised and how often does that happen?
It has been a while. The most recent time it was updated was 2010, and part of that process was to separate out some of the items that related more directly to people who are employers, who are directors, because we had by that time the supplement for program administrators, but there is not a set schedule for its revision.
Actually, when we started, what we heard from NAEYC was that it would be revised every 5 years. Right. And then I think after 1 or 2 revisions, the governing board of NAEYC felt that there wasn't need for another revision. So periodically enough new issues come bubbling up, and they get to NAEYC staff and governing board, and they then appoint a committee to look at a revision. And I just would add, because it might be interesting to the people who are listening, that when we first wrote the code, there was not one thing about assessment in it. Assessment was not a problem. Teachers observed children, determined how they were doing, reported to parents. So testing had not come up as an issue in early childhood education. The last revision, I think we added 9 new items relating to appropriate assessment. And if you go through the code, you'll find them in different sections of the code, because that was a new an issue that had emerged. And that's an example of how the code is a living document. So if you think we're due for a revision, I would say let NAEYC know, and they will determine if it's time to appoint a committee to work on a revision.
And if you look, it was reaffirmed and updated. So in 2011, I think I said 2010. I was wrong. 2011, it was updated with just some tweaks of language, but there were no new big ideas as there were what Stephanie was explaining with assessment in the previous revision. So that 2011, they looked at it, decided it didn't need any major revision, but tweaked some of the language.
Okay, thank you. Another listener wants to know, is the code age specific?
Yeah. Early childhood is birth to 8 years old. So, and of course ACEI, if you're familiar with that goes through the middle school years. So I don't see it as age specific.
It grew the items. The code was developed and the supplementary materials developed based on situations in programs that serve children from birth probably through about age 6. But when other organizations have looked at the code, my students in elementary education at University of Hawaii found that many of the items would be very helpful to give them ethical guidance. So I would say it was designed as an NAEYC document, and we focus on birth to 8. But in developing the code, we looked at recurring dilemmas. And in almost every setting, you might find different stakeholders who wanted different things. Parents who wanted what you thought was not good for kids, or colleagues who were doing things you thought weren't right for children. And so probably the code can apply beyond age 8 in selected ways. Good question.
Okay, another listener says she hasn't been able to read the new book, but she's wondering if it addresses the ever-growing concerns around social media.
Yeah, not directly.
Not enough.
We have touched on that. I'm trying to remember, is it a focus on ethics column or was it just a session?
With a column. We did it in a column.
Yeah, we did it in a column, and then we took it to a session as well. I guess the session informed the column. So it is in one of those Focus on Ethics columns that you can find on the website. But of course, it's social media is a moving target. Things are constantly changing, and things like, should you friend the parents of the children you teach? There's some discussion around those kinds of issues.
We haven't even gotten to that. I would ask the person who submitted that question if she or he had some specific things in mind to please contact NAEYC, and they would forward information to us, because that's probably a topic that we should look at more deeply. We maybe need to do another conference session or article, but that's huge right now.
Yeah,
and it wasn't when we started.
Yeah, and we'd like to know some of people who have insights into how to the issues that come up and how to address them. We welcome your input on that.
We all need help on that one.
Right.
So along those lines, another listener wants to know how it's determined which issues are used as examples and who can form part of the revision committees.
Ah, good question.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. Most of the stuff comes to me and Nancy, but it also gets communicated to NAEYC. Holly has been one of the editors involved. Kathy Charner's been involved. Other staff members are involved. And so we kind of get a sense about what's up. What are the hot topics? Things start coming around several times. As I said, what we're going to do at the Institute in Austin is look at issues around transgender children. Now, that was something we didn't talk about 5 years ago, or not very much, and we see it frequently in the media, and we're hearing about it from teachers. So kind of my sense is that issues bubble up, and we love hearing from our members, because they will tell us what's important to them and what they would like us to look at, or what they would like to join us. We've sometimes had guest editors in the column of people who have a real interest in a topic. So that was piece one. Holly, what was the second part of that question? I lost it.
How can they be on the committee to revise?
The committee to revise. I would say, Holly, you want to help with that? We're not revising right now. We love to have people send an email to NAEYC to be forwarded to me. I've got a list that I've started of people to recommend for the next revisions. We don't select, but since we do this work, we often know people from our sessions and just from our own working in communities. We know of people who are interested, and we have suggested those to NAEYC. So communicate that, and it's very likely. NAEYC is always looking for right. people who are interested, and looking for new people to participate in this. Nancy and I have been doing this for a long time, and we're probably not going to do it indefinitely. So we need more people to come in and take some leadership in dealing with ethics. So please stand up and volunteer.
And some of the issues where people have said they'd like to communicate with us directly, our email is in each of those Focus on Ethics columns. If you look at the end of them, you'll see each of our emails. So
write to us.
You can communicate with us directly.
Thank you. Another question is, does the code apply to a public school early childhood program?
If they want it to.
Yeah, it should. Up to 8 years old.
It could. And there are schools, I know the situation in Hawaii because I lived there for so many years. There were schools that had administrators who were early childhood educators, or schools that had some early grade teachers who'd gone through an early childhood program that dealt with the Code of Ethics, and they actually introduced it, and schools have adopted it, not very many. We think it would be a great idea if they would, but somebody would have to advocate for that happening.
So we have several very specific cases here, and this one goes back to what you were talking earlier about how to determine if an issue is an ethical dilemma or not. So one listener writes, a parent showed up for pickup smelling heavily of beer.
And I think that one was in maybe the first version of the ethics book. You can't put children in danger. Can you finesse it? Is in the term we use. Can you address the issue without having to make a hard decision? So instead of slamming the door in that parent's face, could you say, maybe could I drive you home? Can we
have a cup of coffee before you go home?
Yeah. Do you want to sit here and relax a little while before you go home? But if you know you're putting a child in danger, you don't want to put a child in danger.
And you have a responsibility, as graciously as you can, to not put that child in that car. That's a hard one.
Could a friend take you home? Could we put you on the bus? What could you do?
Okay, thank you. Another listener would like to know, how could the code be used for coaches working with child care programs?
Nancy, you write an administration book.
Yeah. I think the place to begin is similar to what we talked about, a program director introducing it. So I think a coach is in a similar role as a director as far as providing professional development to the staff. And of course, you really can't get into the I think of coaching as kind of over children's head, modeling, and so on. So you can't get into nuances of the code, but perhaps you could use your coaching relationship to lead some professional development sessions on the code and help integrate it that way, and then you could reinforce it when you are in the classroom working side by side with teachers.
And let me just interject that for those of you in this audience, we wish we could see you. If you don't know the supplement for administrators and for adult educators, we urge you to look at them because they address some of the specific issues that have to do with those roles. And so a coach might benefit from looking at the supplement for adult educators and find it quite helpful. So if you are working with teachers or administering program, please be sure to go online and look at those supplements. They aren't as well known as we wish they were, and we're thrilled to have this opportunity to either tell you about it if you don't know, or to remind you about it as a resource.
Okay, we have time for one or two more questions. This listener says, I use the code in my college classes. Most of my students work in early childhood programs, and I was shocked to see that no one knew of the code. Why do you think that's the case?
Good question. We wonder too. We do sessions. We do at least one session a year at an NAEYC conference, and usually a session or two in state level conferences. And we start the way we started with you by saying, how well do you know the code? You just heard of it, or have you used it? And we always have people who've never heard about it. So we don't know. We cannot fault our colleagues at NAEYC. They are so committed to this code, and they are so committed to the work and the conference sessions. And I have to say that working on this last book was an absolute joy. We got to work with Holly and Kathy Charner. So NAEYC is doing their part to get the information out, and I'd love to hear from all of you about how can, we think it's important. And the people who use the code really find it useful and really appreciate it. So how do we get it out there more? We'd love to know.
Yeah, and it is a puzzle that if, students coming through programs, if those programs, the higher ed programs, are accredited by NAEYC, it is part of the accreditation process. And my own institution that I left, I was the only one who really beat the drum for ethics, but that's not how it should be, because it is built into, now, it's standard 6, I believe, of the higher ed standards, that students will know and be able to use the code. So it's a mystery how it can be overlooked in post-secondary.
It's certainly in textbooks. I write a textbook, and it's in the textbook as an appendix. It's in teacher education. My sense is it might be better positioned in community college programs that focus more on birth to 5, and certainly in my institution at University of Hawaii, I don't think, I like your term, beat the drum. I certainly beat the drum about ethics, but it didn't happen in other classes. So that's a really interesting question, and something that I hope NAEYC will keep looking at.
Right, and in my experience, it was more integrated into some of those technical college 2-year institutions than it was in the 4-year institutions. And I think part of the reason, as someone has kind of alluded to, how does it fit into the elementary school setting? It's not so clear. So I think that might be one explanation, but it's not a good rationale.
Those are great questions. Thank you, everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and we are going to wrap it up there. Thank you so much, Nancy and Stephanie, for sharing this important information with us today, and all of our listeners and the great questions we've had. I just want to remind everyone that when you get the follow-up survey to this webinar, if you have ethical issues you'd like to share with Nancy and Stephanie, please do so. And again, check out one or all of the resources that they referred to in their slides today. And thank you again, everyone.